The global trade in weapons is a business that counts its profits now in the trillions and its losses in human lives, except that the industry doesn't count its losses. Instead, what the industry does is it celebrates its losses. So, for instance, the chief executive officer of RTX, that most of us know as Raytheon, responsible for many of the bombs and missiles being used in current conflicts, exalted at a shareholders' meeting because of the situation in the Ukraine, because of the situation in the Middle East, which he said would be extremely good news for our shareholders. That's how they see the world. That's what the genocide in Gaza is for these people. It's a business opportunity. For the first time this year, defense spending will exceed $3 trillion. And I want to make a point to you about just three aspects of the global arms trade. I could spend many hours talking to you about many other aspects of it, but I think there are three that are most pertinent for our conversation here today. The first is that this is an industry, and I'm going to refer to the industry as including both what we refer to as conventional weapons, although these distinctions are becoming distorted, as well as the new defense tech sector, if you will, and the new defense tech companies. They operate with impunity. They always have, and they always will. When I wrote my book, The Shadow World Inside the Global Arms Trade, we identified over 570 violations of UN arms embargoes. One of those had ever been investigated, and the arms dealer concerned was made to pay a small fine that he said to me wasn't even pocket change on the $150 million that I made on that deal. It was just an inconvenience, he said, an immoral conviction. It's the only one we came across. The government of Great Britain, together with BAE Systems, Britain's main arms company, can pay £6 billion of bribes on one deal, the so-called Al-Yamamah deal. Nothing happens to them. Nothing. Recently, a smaller British company was found guilty of paying bribes on a deal with Saudi Arabia, another one, for military communications. The judge found the executives not guilty. Why? Because ministers knew about the bribes. So now it's okay. You can pay bribes. You can kill people as long as ministers know about it. That's what the law has become. So the impunity is extremely important, and I'm going to try and explain to you why it exists. The second important characteristic of this trade is the depth of the corruption. 40% of all the world's corruption takes place in the global arms industry. 40%. Why? Huge deals, worth billions, negotiated between very small numbers of people, and everything to do with the deal takes place behind a veil of national security imposed secrecy. So it's impenetrable to journalists, to investigators, to researchers, and very importantly, to prosecutors. So corporate executives and our mendacious political leaders will do things on arms deals that they wouldn't dare do in other sectors of the economy. And the reason that corruption is so important, which speaks to the third dimension, is that a lot of this corruption finds its way into the main political parties and senior politicians in what we call the West, or what Francesca Albanese more appropriately calls the global minority. Just one example. The odious Tony Blair. I calculated many, many years ago, so it's a figure way out of date, that he had made personally since leaving office, directly out of the decision to invade Iraq and his association with British and American arms companies, a minimum of £110 million personally. It'll be many, many times greater than that today. And many have followed in his footsteps, with my repulsive little MP, Keir Starmer, only the latest to scurry off after Tony Blair to make his millions. So when BAE or someone else pays £6 billion of bribes to members of the Saudi royal family, to various intermediaries, so-called arms dealers, that doesn't all go to them. A significant amount of it comes back to Britain in what we call the feedback principle. And in that deal, for instance, the Tory party, the Conservative Party of Margaret Thatcher, received no one knows how much money. Because the main arms dealer involved in the transaction, Wafiq Saeed, after whom the Saeed Business School at Oxford University is named, spread money out amongst thousands and thousands of individuals to pay into Tory party coffers. Happens in different ways in Germany, France, Austria, Belgium, Holland, Italy, wherever you want to look in the so-called West. The only place where it's transparent is the United States of America, where they have a system of legalized bribery. You can see who's been paid what and how many billions of dollars of contracts went back to that company that paid them. It's like the Donald Trump version of corruption in the arms trade. Doesn't know how to keep his mouth shut. But it's important now also to understand that these companies today are owned by the world's major financial institutions. The same financial institutions who own so many industries, the same financial institutions who own much of the commercial media throughout the Western world. And we're surprised why we never see an anti-conflict, an anti-war article written in the mainstream media. And we're talking here, you know the names as well as I do, be it BlackRock, State Street, Fidelity, etc., etc. And what the arms trade does is it takes public money, our money, and it converts it into private profit more successfully and more quickly than any other sector in recorded economic history. So in effect, what we as taxpayers are doing is we are first of all paying for all of this military equipment, because I'll come on to another side of that in a moment, and because our defense companies are the most heavily subsidized companies there have ever been. BAE Systems in Britain pays less than 12% of all of its own research and development costs. The rest is paid for by the taxpayers of Britain. So it's converting our money into private profits, which is why our defense budgets go up every single year. Now, if we look at the role of the State of Israel within this industry, you will be shocked, horrified, and devastatingly surprised to discover that Israel sits at the fulcrum, at the center of this appalling and odious trade. Now, it doesn't sit at the center in the terms that it is the greatest producer of weapons the world has ever known. That fine honor rests with the United States of America, which produces more than 40% of all of the world's weaponry. But what Israel does is two crucial things. As Anthony Lowenstein has written about so brilliantly, it acts as the laboratory for the Western arms industry, not just for its own industry, but for the Western arms industry. But as importantly as that, it also acts as a shop window for that same weaponry and its own weaponry. Now, of course, Israel receives in excess of $4 billion every year from the United States of America in defense funding. money that doesn't leave the United States. Israel spends it with American defense companies, Lockheed Martin, RTX, etc., etc. And the extraordinary thing is, even during the period of the genocide, when America has given Israel exponentially more defense financing than that, and provided it with massive amounts of weaponry, 70% of all of the weaponry that has been used in the genocide comes from the United States of America, to be followed by countries like Germany, France, the United Kingdom. The remarkable thing that I've discovered as I've been researching our new book that's coming out in November is that most of these weapon systems haven't been paid for by Israel because its economy is in free fall. Will they ever be paid for? Or are we, the taxpayers of Western countries, going to have provided the funding for the weapons that have been used in this genocide as well? But in this role as shop window, the other thing that Israel does is it tests illegal banned weapons on the Palestinian people. White phosphorus being the most obvious example. And in addition to that, it has become the main purveyor of the so-called homeland security, an industry that has as its heart the terrifying technology that Jude has spoken about, and the surveillance and investigation of not just the Palestinian people, but of all of us. I discovered that a colleague of mine and I, this colleague has just written a withering book about Keir Starmer's corruption and ineptitude, that we've been under surveillance and investigation since 2023. Two of the clients of the private company doing this investigation and surveillance are an organization called Labour Together, which pushed Starmer to power, and a company you might have heard of called Elbit Systems. So they're actually using the technology they're developing to surveil and investigate their enemies in our countries as well. But now Israel is at the apex of its own industry, the genocide industry. I want to know, because I don't know the answer yet, but hopefully in a few months I will know, how many arms fairs Israel has held during the genocide. Because during every other incursion into the occupied territories, there is immediately afterwards an arms fair where Israel sells the latest weaponry that has been tested on the Palestinian people. But now, the other thing I need to say before I conclude is that as we realize the advent of this terrifying defense tech industry, with more and more of the revenue that these tech companies generate coming from their defense-related work. You know, I spent 25 years investigating some of the worst people ever born on this planet. The arms dealers, the military leaders, the politicians who've taken us to war. None of them come close to the awfulness of people like Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, Alex Karp, Larry Ellison, etc., etc. The first two mentioned, both of their grandparents immigrated into apartheid South Africa because it was the closest they could find to a Nazi state after the Second World War. And their children, rather than learning the lessons that most of us learned from the apartheid state, instead have become racist white supremacists who believe that genocide is justified and are amongst the most powerful human beings on the planet. So unless we are prepared to do something about our own arms trade, the reality is this industry will continue to make each and every one of our countries more corrupt, less democratic, undermine the rule of law, make us far, far less safe, and continue to ensure that there is a small group of people who profit in ways that we have never seen before in economic history, from not just the world's first live-screen genocide, but for the other imperial and settler colonial genocides that will follow. Thank you.